Township Planning Commission is called to order. Please rise for pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Let the minutes reflect that all the commission members are present with our code enforcement officer and our recording secretary. Absent is the solicitor and the engineer who may or may not arrive later. First item of business is the election of the chairman. Any suggestion?
Well, I would suggest and I think would nominate Dan to be the chair. You did such a good job, you're gonna get stuck with it again, I think.
I'll second it.
I think you guys are all like that. Any other nominations? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Well, with my abstention. Election of vice chairman. Recommendation? Vice chairman?
What comment you
No, we did that before, but I don't wanna hear you guys today, but I would recommend Kevin to be vice chairman. It's nice to have a zoning expert on this board, and, so I heartily recommend Kevin for vice chair.
I'll second it.
Okay. Any other recommendations? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Appointment of board secretary. That's the position you held last year, wasn't it?
Yes.
I'd like to recommend to Peter.
I recommend Peter.
I'm good at signing things for Jackie.
Okay, and I'll second that. Any other? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Appointment of recording secretary. That'd be Ms. Rugy. Since she's already here tonight, I'd make that nomination. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Any others? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And our monthly meeting dates will be on the fourth Wednesday of each month, except in November and December, when it will be on the third Wednesday, all starting at 6 p.m. Okay, first item of business is approval of the November 20th meeting minutes.
Dan, do we need a motion on my meeting dates?
Well, it's already been published in the paper, and a whole lot.
Well, I
Okay.
moved a little quick.
I'll make the motion to approve those dates. We have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
That carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we have the November 20th meeting minutes. I had two suggestions. On page 2, the last paragraph, the fourth line about the middle of the line, where it says purposes of creating a future, it should say purposes of creating a future. Drop that A.
Where you at there, Dan?
Fourth line, purposes of creating a future building is what it should say.
Okay.
The other item I had was on page 4, the second paragraph, which is the motion. It says, I read this and said, wow, is that convoluted? I'd like to see someone diagram that sentence. I think we should change that to Mr. McKeegan made a motion seconded by Mr. Bloom to make the changes to the PRD section of the Township zoning ordinance number 368 as discussed, and then forward to the Board of Supervisors with a recommendation of approval.
That's fine.
Any other?
Succinct.
Okay. We make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved.
Kevin, for a second.
I second the motion.
Peter. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We have no development proposals, no advisory presentations, no old business, and no new business. So the next item business correspondence. Can we move item B? Is everybody okay if we move item B and consider that first? Okay.
Thanks, Chairman. Item B is the sewage facilities planning module, for property at 109 Cove Run Road, which is a standard DEP form, that Dan Slagel's firm always reviews, and that's what you see before you. He already filled out section C, answered all the questions, and it requires planning commission signature from the chairman, and this is to supply them with public sewage, upcoming in the future.
Okay, so it's basically taking them off septic and adding them to the
Yes.
public sewer system.
That's correct. So we will need, Dan, your signature, for public sewage, yes.
And Jeff, just for background, which municipal authorities will they be?
Here, yes. So we'll just need a, I guess we need a motion on that?
Yes, I think we need a motion to approve that and we sign it.
Yeah.
Someone like to make that motion?
So moved. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So moved.
And I'll second. Michael? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Now we'll go back to item A, which is citizens' comment that we received from Mr. Capone.
Just to let the planning commission know, this was a letter that was turned in by Chris, that went to the supervisors. Irv, the solicitor, felt that it was better to bring his comments back to the planning commission, because there was questions as to the final draft that they have, is it right, or, 2 points that Chris brings out, where the errors are, or do we just, want to, is the final version fine, or do we have to change it? And Chris, if you want to stand up and speak, to your letter, that's fine.
Okay, Chris Capone, 66 Windsor. Initially, I talked to Mr. Newman, Supervisor Newman, and Mr. Anderson was there at the time. I just said there were two things I saw when reviewing the draft PRD that, in my mind, at least the way I was interpreting it, I did not think matched the intent of the planning commission. Mr. Anderson asked me to summarize it in the letter and copy Mr. Newman, so I did. Basically comes down to two things. I believe you all have a copy of the letter. One was in the open space calculation, there's a section in there that essentially says it's net of the lots for the houses, which seems to have a drastic effect on the way things work. My recollection from the discussions that you guys had was that was not what you intended. And then the other one was a little bit more minor. It was greater than versus less than number, which again, I think was opposite to the intent of the planning commission. So I don't know, I don't think I need to read the whole thing. I mean, you guys have the letter. I mean, if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. If not, I can sit down and shut up.
Well, actually, I read your letter, I looked at the ordinance and said, wow, how did we miss that? Thank you for your independent review of that. I think that was our engineer. Yeah, it's one of those things where you read it, you know what it's supposed to say, and you just kind of ignore what the words really say, so.
Yeah.
I totally agree with the need.
All right, the greater than, less than, I mean, that's, I think, a very easy,
Yeah.
simple mistake, and I think the correction of that is very straightforward. I mean, yeah, obviously it's up to you.
Actually,
gentlemen.
what I wrote down is that no less than 25% of PRD sites shall be set aside as common open space, and such open space shall not include any portion of a parcel containing a dwelling. And then we have the exceptions below that.
But the only thing I'd like, and Chris, thank you for the letter, I appreciate it. I agree the second one is easy, that should just be 50%.
Yeah, yeah, I think that fixes easy. The other one, I'm not. Yeah,
The other- the other
All we
one-
need to do there is delete the no more than
Yeah.
from the beginning of that sentence.
The other one though is, I'm not entirely convinced that you're right, or that it makes a difference. Now, just hear me out, hypothetical.
I'm not either.
Yeah, so let's just say on a standard subdivision, and I'm just pulling these numbers without reference to the ordinances, but just for discussion. So let's just say in a standard subdivision, lot sizes have to be half an acre. But with the PRD, you can have quarter acre lots, okay? But you also have to have all these other things. If you have lots that fall between a quarter an acre and a half an acre, so they're larger than what the PRD says has to be the minimum, but they're smaller than the minimum, which is kind of where we were going, smaller than the minimum in a standard subdivision. Do we really care that the lots are bigger? I mean, in some respects, I think in some respects it's occurred to me that a lot of the complaints citizens had with the PRD ordinance before was that you were getting smaller lots and you were cramming more, putting it that way, cramming more things in. But giving developers the flexibility to kind of fall between that PRD minimum and the subdivision minimum, if it's a lot, presumably there's gonna be green space on the lot. Do we really care? I mean, that's the only point I'd like maybe your thoughts on. Because it occurred to me that if we.
So, I understand what you're saying. This is why I sort of broached the discussion with, Mr. Anderson and Mr. Newman was, it's not crystal clear to me that this is wrong. It seemed like it maybe brought an unintended consequence, but my biggest concern was just the complication from it.
Okay.
If you look at the formula, if you really read through that paragraph step by step, and I did provide an example there where you sort of go through the calculation as listed there. And that example, the outcome isn't bad. It just seems like it's unduly complicated, and my biggest concern would be, there are probably other cases, which I only looked at one, because I wanted to discuss this before. There are probably other cases where there may be unintended outcomes because of the complexity of that. And really, my question was like, did you really need that phrase in there and say net of the?
I think
I don't
it's
have a
simpler
strong-
if we
yeah.
just say, we have to have 25%. And did I understand you correctly? You were saying part of that 25% could be a building part of.
No, it would still have to be, it would still have
Has
to
to
be
be
25%, but my point responding to where I thought Chris was going was that I don't particularly care whether the lots are larger than a PRD
Yeah.
minimum, but smaller than subdivision minimum.
Yeah,
So-
neither do I.
Well, if you could read my writing, do you like the way I said that? I mean, it's fairly straightforward.
Yeah, I think that does it, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. McKee, my example, I was just trying to show in some cases, you could actually wind up with less open space.
Less common open space.
I'm sorry, yes, common open space,
Right.
yes, because of
We
the
don't
way
want
that
less
is that's
common
written.
space. We have
Okay.
a minimum we require, period.
And I don't think that was really the,
Yeah,
Yeah.
there
The
could
intent.
be special circumstances. No.
Okay.
but I think my biggest concern is just the complexity of the way it is,
Okay.
works out.
If I could add a couple things, I agree with Chris. The ordinance, the way that it's currently written, is overly complicated. The original PRD ordinance, if you read it, it's very simple. It's 25% common open space, period. So you take the total amount of the acreage, you're 59%, you take 25%, that's the open space, period.
Well, that's basically what I say and what I thought might be the revision.
So later on, the version that we, we'll call it the intermediate version, what we did was, in the conversation I think you and I brought up, is we took the very simplistic formula, the way that it was written, and said that, and I could read it, but basically it excludes the area associated with the detention facilities, period. In doing so, you have to remember the original marching orders that the supervisors gave to us was to reduce the overall density more in line with the standard subdivision. It wasn't to create such complexity that you excluded PRDs.
But Dan, developers play games with the definitions all the time.
Well,
And what we're
the
trying
original
to-
one was very simplistic. You can't play games with it.
Well, no, you can, because they were including in common open space things that truly are not common open space. They were
Mhm.
including stormwater, they were including roads,
And-
they were including other things. So all we're
And
doing
again, we
here-
want those natural features in the common open space. We want the floodplains, we want the
But we
wetlands.
want more than that.
Okay.
So,
I think-
It
I don't
includes
think we do, but.
power line
I understand.
easements,
Yeah,
gas line easements, all those types of things were included in open space.
I think they have language.
Jackie, I'll give you this, my notes on this, so you can, we need to draft a letter to the board of supervisors on this, make these changes.
Yeah, these two
And I
points.
think we should also make sure Chris is included a copy, we can include a nice little thank you to him on that as well.
Thank you, I appreciate your.
Okay.
Make sure you tell people that's the only mistake we made.
Well, I will say, so what Mr. Newman asked me to go through and do some example calculations. I didn't really wanna go through and do a bunch of those, given the ambiguity maybe, I don't know if that's the right word of the.
Yeah. I mean,
So-
it's simpler and more straightforward, we can make the language easier, it's for everybody to understand.
Okay.
The residents, the developers,
Courts.
people, the
Well,
courts.
it is-
if there's
You
litigation.
gotta make it really simple for some of the courts, though.
It is when we start to apply this. So what is the language that you're suggesting?
It's to change the beginning of that paragraph to no less than 25% of the PRD site shall be set aside as common open space, and such open space shall not include any portion of a parcel containing a dwelling. Then we have the other exclusions below that.
That's fine.
So again, what your intent is to take the total acreage of the site,
Right.
and multiply it to whatever, 25%.
And that has to be common open space.
So, and then that portion of it can't include that litany of things that follow.
That's correct.
It can include it, but that would be add-on, because they're included in
So,
the calculation.
so in addition to, okay,
So, okay, so we need a motion on this to make these changes and draft the letter to the board of supervisors.
I make a motion to authorize Dan to sign a letter to the supervisors, varying, as discussed, the introductory language to section C and making section C5 reads as 50% rather than
No more than, okay. Do you have a second on the motion? I'll second. Michael? Any discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Anybody opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody. We'll make this a short meeting. Okay. Then we have the letter of recommendation that went out after our last meeting, and next item of business is adjournment.
So moved.
So we got Kevin and Peter. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all.
Wait a minute, I busted my cup to get here about 6 o'clock. I was out round 8 and I said, oh my God.
Happy New Year to all, everybody in the audience, and stay warm.
Happy New Year.
I know we're off the
Hope to see
record,
you
but
back
are
again.
we anticipating any development proposals anytime soon?
I don't think so.
I've had a couple calls on some minors,
Okay.
lot line revisions.
Okay.
Two I would.
We'll wait and see. Nothing big.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Miranda thinks you come back.
Thank you.
What's that?
The Miranda one?
Yeah, but there'll probably be a couple of months yet before they get ready for final. Don't you think, Dan?
what's that?
Miranda.
We're on the plan back here. I think that'll be a couple of months before they're ready for final.
What's the Miranda one?
Frederick
I'm
Farms.
Oh, Frederick Farms.
We only gave that tentative,
I
right?
think that'll be a couple of months.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let's come back to final.
Before, yeah, they wanna move rather quickly though.
I think they have.
I would expect by the
I'm
March.
not sure if they held it yet or not.
Has there been a public hearing?
Yeah.
There was? Okay.
Okay. We can all go home.
Good.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was late.
With the
The next meeting.
There we go.
Thank you. All right, thanks.